That's what scared me. The webinar is now streaming live on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Back to best behavior, everybody.
That's not good at all.
No.
Have to stop talking about peanut butter whiskey, don't I, Joseph?
Well, I did wonder when you talked about the Winchester Mansion whether that was the spirit she was trying to keep away. Actually,
yeah, well, that's true.
Dale, I'm going to tell my boys to throw a party and have you over this weekend. They still have that check you wrote them for $1 million.
That's terrific.
Yes.
I was cleaning out a bunch of stuff, and I came across a check written by my best man from my wedding 39 years ago. It was for $8,500,000.
How much has it gone up in value?
I think about that. Yeah, but I when I found it, I immediately tacked it onto the wall of my basement there. So
theirs is on the refrigerator.
Good.
Has anyone been given a bad check in earnest?
Yeah.
That you've tried to cash?
I used to do.
What's the highest bad check you've ever tried to cash? I bet I can top you.
Oh yeah, I think you can, Dan Kerr.
But mine was very embarrassing because it was a friend who was paying me for services, yeah.
Is he still a friend?
What's that?
Is he still a friend?
Yeah, Kevin's a friend.
Oh, we're having fun.
But I was only $200, Dan. That's all it was.
Okay. Yeah, I got that beat by a little bit.
Chris, you're like 5 figures, isn't it, Dan Kerr?
$100,000 check.
Wow.
Wow. Written in earnest.
Written in earnest.
I wish I could write.
You should tell the story if you can. He had a track record for this, right?
I'll have to tell the tale sometime. It's a marvelous, it's a sad and hilarious story all at once.
Yeah.
Can I say something which is a tribute, I think, to both Americans and to American Catholicism? That I've been selling books at talks for 19 years now, since I've been over here, and I don't do cards, so it's cash or check. And in 19 years, nobody has ever given me a bad check, except for one person who just forgot to sign it. And I wrote to them, and they delivered the check thereafter. So, 19 years, no bad checks.
That's great. American Chester say we've never had any bad checks.
I used to do visits as Santa Claus in the Advent season, and I would stuff myself. I'd be Santa. We would charge like $60 or something like that. This was the old days. And one woman just talked us down. She talked me all the way down to $35 for a visit from Santa for her kids before Christmas. And on the way, we slid on some ice and did probably $500 damage to my car, which the deductible didn't cover. So I'm already in the red. And we get to her place, and she lives in this big, posh, suburban mansion. She lived in a really nice place. And I was ticked off as Santa Claus but I had, Santa's always happy. So Santa can't get me mad. So Santa did the thing, and then she gave me a check as Santa afterwards for $35, and it bounced.
Oh wow!
We had a bad check to the kennel one time. This is when we were still living in Illinois, and it was an unhappy set of circumstances. The marriage was falling apart, and they were trying to get a puppy to make the kids happy or something. And anyway, it eventually got resolved, but it wasn't anywhere near 100,000. Though out here, you can almost get that for one of these Cavaliers now.
For King Charles Cavalier.
We're getting close. We found out today, by the way, Eponine has 5 puppies in her uterus right now. Those will be here this weekend. I know everyone's excited.
We are. Thank you. We were all thinking and praying for Eponine here. Thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers.
T's and P's. T's and P's for Eponine.
Yeah.
Dan, do you have any pregnant pigs on your property?
You better believe it. Hamzilla, who weighs about 600 pounds, is due to Pharaoh within the next couple of weeks. Now, my finest Berkshire sow, Petunia is her name. Petunia farrowed a couple weeks ago, and this was her first go round. and it didn't go real well. And she ended up this happens frequently with pigs. They'll crush their little ones. They'll lay on them. And so she crushed all but one.
Wow.
Who we now have. And in fact, I should go get her. Her name's Prudence. She's about this big. And we've been bottle feeding her here at the kids have been taking care of her. So I'll go get her. Kevin, you've got your cat?
Yeah.
Or is that a skunk? What is that?
That's our cat. She stays in the basement where I am. She never comes upstairs because we have 2 dogs. And so she spends all of her time in the basement. But then she bugs me when I'm trying to live stream.
I'm looking at my notes here, which tell me what I'm supposed to be doing, because I'm the person that drew the short straw to MC this event, which means I'm the person that has to be nice to Kevin.
So, but I'm rehearsing you, Joseph, and you're giving the speech, right? I'm introducing you. I'm introducing you, and you're giving the speech, right?
Am I?
You're doing it. Kevin, no. Kevin, you are giving the speech as Joseph Pierce.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's easy.
Okay.
That's easy.
So-
I'm not going to introduce you as Kevin O'Brien. I'm going to show you that now. Although I would say one thing, Kevin. I don't
Yes.
know why anybody who's playing Santa should ever complain about being in the red.
Kevin, if I recall, you wrote some of those stories in your book, right? I think
yeah. Some of those are
those are wonderful.
Yeah. Well, see, so we can plug the book. That's one of the things we can do.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
those are
You plug your book. What's your book? What's the name of the book, Kevin?
It's called An Actor Bows. I've got a picture of it and everything that I'm going to show later.
As I recall, I wrote a very compelling blurb for it.
You did, and you made it sound as if you'd actually read it.
Well, I probably read more than half of it.
Well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Did
The
you
best-
read the top half or the bottom half?
The best Santa story I have, I also used to do online Santa Claus visits. It was called Hello Santa was the company. And they hired Santa Clauses all over the country, and you'd sit with a backdrop of a Christmas tree, and you'd tell the kids you were at the North Pole. And I would have maybe 10 in a given day. And, the moms would have their kids there, and you'd video chat with the kids as Santa Claus. And they would give you inside information about the kids, so that while you were talking, you would look at the camera, but you could always then look down and see what grade they were in, what's their sister's name, what's their favorite food, and you could surprise them because then Santa Claus knows all these things about them.
And you
So
slept at night.
I'm talking to one little boy, and I said, well, how's your dog Spot? And he said, Santa Claus, how did you know my dog's name was Spot? I said, I'm Santa Claus. I know everything. He said, oh, yeah? What's my cat's name, Santa? And I looked down, and of course, we're live. This is a performance. So I'm trying not to hesitate, and I'm looking down, and there's no indication that the kid has a cat. There's no indication of the cat's name. So, of course, I say, you really think that I don't know the name of your cat? And he said, there's no way that you know that my cat's name is Snowball. I said, your cat's name is Snowball. He said, how'd you know that? That's absolutely true.
Was he from Newfoundland? That was a little 33rd degree humor from my brother.
Why are we speaking Spanish?
Well, as there's a brief pause here, I am supposed to apparently welcome everyone. So welcome everyone. And apparently we have over 3,000 people registered for this event. So
Yeah, we don't start for another 7 minutes though, Joseph.
I know, but it says here 6:45 p.m.
follow the
MC
script.
to welcome.
Stick to the script.
Yeah. You follow the script, Joseph. Our job is to get you off the script. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, I can ignore the rest of it. I'm quite happy to do that.
No. Keep going. Sorry.
So we have 3,000 people registered. Obviously, I don't know how many people can get into here. Is it 200, 500,
No.
100?
1,000.
Many.
All
A
right. So-
million. It's a
I
million.
only
And,
see
obviously,
6.
and the rest can watch it recorded, presumably, right?
Right.
at some point. Yeah. And then it says here, while you are gathered, I'm reading from the script here, Dad. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try to ad-lib this, right? While you are gathered, if you have time, take a photo to share with us. We'll provide details on how to submit it in our follow-up email.
This must be from someone in marketing. Someone in marketing came up with this.
It wasn't me.
Take a
I didn't even
picture
know how to
of.
take a
Take a
photograph.
picture of. Okay.
Oh, that's a good one.
Is this your marketing? Is this your marketing department, Dale, that came
No,
up with
this came right out of Catholic Answers, Chris.
No.
Yeah. What are we? One of your people, Emily Sanchez, Chris, asks, "What are we to take a picture of?" Why would someone from Catholic Answers ask that question?
Yeah,
Come
yeah.
on, Chris.
She's trying to throw you a softball there, Dale, I think. She's trying to
Okay.
help you out because it looked like you were kind of tripping up there a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. But she still wants to know and answer the question. What is she supposed to take a picture of?
We're supposed to take a picture of ourselves gathered together.
Okay.
Oh,
All
I'm
right.
going to do a selfie.
Okay. Can we all sort of maybe all huddle in
oh,
together?
Pucker-
Then? We
Pucker-
do that? Is that what we do?
Kevin, pucker your lips,
Yeah, right.
right?
We'll do that thing, right? Right?
Yeah, there you go. Excellent.
Good. Hey, there you go.
That's great.
Who do I send that to?
There's going to be instructions.
No one.
In the
Oh,
follow-up
you
email.
just-
In
you're
the
just meant to
follow-up
take a
email.
picture.
there's
Yeah,
gonna be
follow-up
instructions.
email.
That's what it
I'm
says in the
gonna
script.
text mine to Joseph Pierce.
You can do that.
Yeah. You text.
Right. I don't know how to do texts, but that's
Oh,
fine.
well,
It
then.
just disappeared down the black hole.
You keep going up in my estimation, Joseph.
Is there time for a beer run?
William,
I tell you what we can
There's
do. We
gotta
haven't
be.
yet discussed, for those who are imbibing,
Yes.
what it is we're actually imbibing this evening. So, Dale, would you like to tell us what you're imbibing?
I'm going with my old standby Chateau Ste. Michelle Chardonnay from the state of Washington, the great state of Noel Culbertson and the newest independent nation on earth.
Well, there we go.
is that the part of Washington that they've occupied?
No, that part of Washington is not occupied. They're still making wine there.
Well, I'm actually, mine is actually a Coeur d'Alene Cellars Cabernet Sauvignon, supplied by the same friend I referenced a few weeks ago. Last time we did it, sent me a case of 6 different wines. This is the cab. It's extremely good. And I don't know if you saw it, but someone sent me a link about Coeur d'Alene, where half the population came out with submachine guns, waiting for the Antifa to turn up.
Yeah.
And I sent it to my friends in England and saying only in America. So here's to Coeur d'Alene.
Here, the heart of the lion, Idaho.
So Kevin, what are you imbibing?
We ran out of Maker's Mark because I drank Maker's Mark in honor of Joseph Pierce because that's his favorite. But so this is now a Two Gingers Irish whiskey.
Two Gingers. Is that any better?
It's much better than it's much better than the J&B that I was trying to drink earlier.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Irish whiskey is better than the cheap blended Scotch, in my personal opinion. So who do we have left? Christopher.
I'm drinking a Perrier flavored with peach.
Perrier flavored with peach.
I'm in my office. I have to drive home still.
But
Yeah.
that's what they all drink in California is Perrier with peach, though.
Yeah.
Isn't it pretty much?
No, it's
And Chris, I'm in my office. Chris, I'm in my office drinking, and I've got to walk downstairs at some point. It could be tricky. It could be tricky.
in California. It's kombucha or something, Dale.
Dan, and what are you imbibing this evening? Something and kombucha?
Cold beer.
Heineken.
It's a cold
Heineken?
It's a cold
How
beer
can
night.
distributors drink Heineken?
What's wrong? I don't know what's wrong with Heineken. You
It's
know
a
the history.
global product.
You know the history of every alcoholic beverage known to man. It's a cold beer.
Only in America.
This is
Hey,
what we
Da-
do
hey,
in the
Dale,
Midwest. We sit out on our porch. It's a hot day. You drink a cold beer.
Dale,
You
my
get
number
good-
3 boy, John John Paul just got a job in the brew room at Prize, which is one of your micro brews there.
A new microbrewery. Good for him. That's a new microbrewery just opened up across the street from Chesterton Academy in downtown Hopkins.
That's
Joseph.
excellent. They're taking over the world. There's hope for the future.
Yeah, when you come visit, Joseph, I will take you over there.
Well, God bless you. I'm looking forward to the invitation, Dale.
All right.
We're not quite at 7. I'm looking about my clock here because I don't have a clock on my computer that I can see. So I don't know if Kevin might need a bit longer.
William's drinking, Joseph. William. We don't know what William's
William. William, you drinking?
Old Prospector, or what is it?
No changes.
Granddad.
Old Granddad.
I had to
Old Granddad.
You know the story behind Old Granddad?
I don't know if we do.
I
Tell
don't
us.
know if you've ever told it.
If you look very carefully, you'll see that's Old Granddad right there.
In the middle. Yeah.
Yep. But do you know who that is?
It's Frank Borman, the astronaut.
Nope. It's Basil Hayden.
Ah.
Oh.
Basil Hayden was a Roman Catholic who fled Virginia, came to Bardstown, well, near Bardstown, Kentucky, and he was one of the first distillers. Now, here's this thing about Old Granddad. You see the size of this bottle. You can go to a gas station, state liquor store, and if you look at the bourbon section, at all the really nice bourbon, and then you lower your gaze down to the bottom shelf, that's where you'll find Old Granddad for about $12. And if you, which I remind you is Basil Hayden. As you gaze back up, for $50, you can buy a bottle of Basil Hayden. So I'm drinking Old Granddad.
How much better is Basil Hayden than Old Granddad? Is it the same drink with a different label?
Well, when you drink Old Granddad, it kind of gives you a taste of napalm. First here, and then there, and then there. And that takes about 2 seconds.
Okay.
If you have a Basil Hayden, it takes about 4 seconds.
Okay.
So it's twice as betterer.
Still the main tasting note is napalm.
Yeah, it's like burnt pumpkin that's been burnt, just a little bit more.
I love the taste of napalm in the morning.
No, Basil Hayden is great, but Old Granddad's quite good too. In all seriousness, the difference is just a few years of aging. It's the exact same bourbon.
Oh, I thought they poured it through the Brita filter one more time.
Well, no, there's a guy named Clem who kind of rinses it and then spits it into a bucket. That's Old Granddad.
Yes.
And Basil Hayden doesn't have that extra step, Chris.
Right. Not as many enzymes.
No, it's not as good for your immune system.
Right, exactly. Is the cheaper version in lockdown?
I got it locked up right here with me. I'm not going to let it go, Joseph.
Well, yeah, it seems to me in a time of virus, drinking somebody else's saliva might be a little bit dodgy,
Governor Sununu, our governor in the Granite State, live free or die, did not need a task force for this one resolution, that the state liquor stores were essential services that would remain open.
What a perfect introduction to our episode tonight, Joseph. Take us away.
One essential thing.
Okay, well, I would like to, indulge in some rapport, but I always obey Dale Alquist because he's bigger than I am, and he's told me that I've got to keep to the script. So it's 7 p.m. Central Time, which is the time for greetings and admin. And someone has to discuss this with me. That didn't happen. Greetings, see above. Over 3,000 people have registered for this event. I've said that already, but I'm supposed to say it again. Now I introduce each panelist and our special guest. It says guests, but I think we only have one. So, and it says here, I'm Joseph Pierce. That's a great help. I'm really pleased that's there because at this juncture, I wasn't quite sure. So I'm Joseph Pierce, and I'm editor of the St. Austin Review, which is true. I am editor of the St. Austin Review. And I would don't think I need to say anything else about myself. Dale Dale Oldquist, apparently, according to this, is joining us from the frozen tundra of the Twin Cities. And Dale is president of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. And Dale's many other things, most of which are unmentionable, so I shan't mention them. And then sticking to the script, Chris Check, joining us from the not-so-frozen beaches of sunny San Diego in California. He's the president of Catholic Answers. This is great. This is great. I'll tell you, whoever wrote this, it's great. And then we have Dr. William Fahey, who's the president of Thomas More College. That's in Merrimack, New Hampshire. It doesn't say it in the script. There's a little bit of ad-libbing, but I'll now get back to the script.
He's so
and then,
Smooth. That was smooth.
that was good.
Yeah.
And then Daniel Kerr is president of St. Martin's Academy in Kansas. And the five of us collectively, not collectivistically, that's not in the script, are the Troubadours. And now I have some tech issues in. I better read the script for these admin tech issues. If you have a problem with buffering, refresh your screen.
Keep it to yourself.
If you have a problem with buffering, that's when you polish your shoes, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what buffering is. If you have a problem with buffering, that's buffeting, isn't it? I don't know. If you have a problem with buffering, refresh your screen or try to log back on. And if you're watching on chesterton.org/troubadours, try pressing play or reloading page. And any questions or tech issues, email live@chesterton.org. And tonight's event will be recorded and we'll share the link following the call. All right, now it's small talk with MC and guest speaker. Okay, well, our guest troubadour this evening is Kevin O'Brien, who is a very good friend of mine. We go back quite a long way. I'm guessing probably about 2005. I'm not sure where we first met. Perhaps Kevin can remember that. First of all, before I do it, Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you. It's great
Where
to be
did
here.
we first meet?
2005, Ave Maria.
Oh, so I got the
Yeah.
year right.
That's
Okay.
right.
You came
I
to
was there.
Maria.
I
Yeah.
saw their first meeting.
That's right.
Oh, it was a thing to behold. Let me tell you.
Things have only got better since then, though, Dale.
Right.
They've already got better since then.
Was that when Ave Maria was in the retirement village?
Right. Right.
No, that was when it was in Florida.
So I think that was probably, I'm imagining then, Kevin, when you came down to Ave Maria University, when you were working with Father Fezio,
Right.
Ignatius Press, who was then
That's how he got the job. Was when he came to Ave Maria. That's why Father Fessio hired him, because
Oh, okay.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's
He
right.
came down to do a show, and
Yep.
Father Fezio was impressed and gave you the job with Ignatius Theatre of the Word Incorporated, correct?
That's exactly how it happened, Joseph.
That-
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you, Dale. I had no idea. And then not long after that, we were working together. I know that Kevin's worked quite a bit with Dale on the Chesterton series, several series that Dale did on EWTN. And also that Kevin and I worked on two 13-part series on Shakespeare's Catholicism for EWTN and on, I think, 4 or possibly 5 hour-long Tolkien documentaries. So whereas you can you imagine Kevin O'Brien as Gollum? Yeah, well, you won't need to because he's going to give the talk this evening in persona Gollum, apparently. I have no idea what he's going to talk about. It was written down somewhere, but so I can't introduce you on that score. Except to say that it's an honor to have you. You are a troubadour, even if only a guest troubadour according to the current scenario. You're certainly one of my closest and best friends, and it's an honor to know you and work with you. And that's enough flattery for one evening. So without any further ado, I suppose, well, Kevin O'Brien is the founder and director of Theatre of the Word Incorporated, and his website is grunky.com.
That's
Hey,
it.
got it right.
Got it right.
So check out what he's doing at grunky.com, but I'm sure we can announce that again later in the event. If there's anything that you would like me to have said and I didn't, say it yourself.
I am recording a book that Joseph compiled as an audiobook for St. Benedict Press, poems every Catholic should know. And I'm really enjoying it, except for the fact that Joseph is including as much Middle English as he can possibly fit. So I'm learning how to pronounce Middle English, and every time I do, I take a little sip of two gingers in honor of Joseph. So
And
Give us a little flavor of Middle English, Kevin. Give us a little flavor of Middle English.
Well, the only part I read today was readeth the great poet of Italy, that hich the dant, for he can all devise fro point to point, not a word while he fall.
There we go. And that's Chaucer speaking about Dante.
Well, that's obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, and everyone knew that.
I know it was to me.
Any translation, it was obvious. But one thing I would say is, I mentioned to Kevin when he sent me the little tape of this, I said, in the inn at the World's End, with Dickens and all his characters and G.K. Chesterton, I said, wouldn't it be great if we were actually also in the Tabard Inn, which is where the pilgrims meet up at the beginning of the Canterbury Tales, and we could have a few pints of ale and get merry. And I said, then we could actually get drunk with the monk. We could tell bawdy stories with the miller. We could carouse with the wife of Bath. And then we could go to confession with the parson. I mean, it's a perfect evening, right?
Yes.
and on that Chaucerian note, I'd like to introduce you to tonight's guest troubadour, Mr. Kevin O'Brien.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Now, I don't know if you guys are seeing me on speaker view out there in internet streaming land, but if you move your mouse and you click on speaker view up at the upper right, you will see me rather than these other troubadours. And the reason you might want to do that is I will be screen sharing and showing some text and pictures and things. And so I'll be a bigger part of your computer screen if you switch to speaker view. Okay, so the title of my talk is The One Essential Thing, because of course we know that only essential things have been allowed during the lockdown. But before I begin, I want to let you know that before we let everybody in the room, the troubadours had a little discussion, and I recorded it on audio. So I don't know if you see this. It begins with Dale. So it goes something like this. I'm Dale Ahlquist, president of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. Whichever way you look at it, our special guest tonight, Kevin O'Brien, is among the 4 greatest writers of all time. The other 3 being Gilbert, Keith, and Chesterton.
Dale, I'd have to disagree. This is Christopher Check of Catholic Answers. The greatest writer who ever existed was clearly the 7th century Nordic Anonymous, who wrote a poem I have had memorized for years and recite at the drop of a hat. And since nobody wears hats anymore, I'll have to recite it now. It's an epic of Fuchsian oratorical protuberance, and it goes something like this. An old Persian ruler named Cyrus would write all his verse on papyrus. I'm sorry to state, Cyrus wasn't so great, 'cause he'd rhyme things with coronavirus.
Excuse me. This is William Fahey of St. Thomas More College. That verse you recited, Chris, which I recall from my studies, is iambic, pedantic, dithyrambic, with sprung rhythm and free rust coating on the undercarriage, was not by the Nordic Anonymous, but written by one of Daniel Kerr's students in a fit of pique. That particular student, Daniel, was outstanding in his field. And that's where I left him. Outstanding in a field, a cow field. He walked all the way back to the barn behind the main campus. And that's not an easy thing to do here in a cow field in rural Kansas, especially when the chips are down.
Daniel, I must say that you offended my British upper class sensibilities, which is fine by me, 'cause now I can go to the pub and have another pint with me mates. Caw, blimey!
And there you have the Troubadours. That is by special request. I'm not going to tell you who asked for that so that you can't blame him. All right, on with the speech. Now, I really am a troubadour. This is the thing that people don't realize, because I have had the honor of appearing at every live Prairie Troubadour conference since everything began. I'm the only one of all 6 of us, except for Daniel, who runs the thing. Daniel and I are the only ones to have appeared at every Prairie Troubadour conference, which is typically held in February in Fort Scott, Kansas. And if it happens next year and we're all not locked in, you have to come. It is one of the most fun times you can have. It's almost as much fun as the annual conference for the Society of G.K. Chesterton. Well, I'm going to give you a little proof that I'm a troubadour. In 2016, I appeared as Hilaire Belloc. Of course, I have to have a little disclaimer. I never appear as myself for obvious reasons. In 2016, I was Hilaire Belloc. In 2017, J.R.R. Tolkien, who is there in his hobbit hole. In 2018, I was Orestes Brownson, the famous 19th century American convert to Catholicism. And in 2019, Stanley Yaki, who was a PhD and priest who speaks on science and faith. And so I've had a great time with all of these conferences. Oh, by the way, I'm also Stanford Nutting. Some of you who maybe have watched Dale's series on EWTN have seen this character appear in some of the episodes. I've also got several videos up as Stanford Nutting. Stanford Nutting, he is an ex-seminarian who dropped out of seminary in the 1970s because it wasn't liberal enough for him. And Stanford made a comment the other day about the coronavirus, and he said, "I'm really excited that we're all locked in because we can get closer to one another and thereby to God." Of course, that's what he says. This is his identical twin half-brother, Bill Johnson, also known as Williamus Filius Johanni. Bill Johnson said the other day, he said, the coronavirus is a wonderful thing, except it's a pestilence. It's a pestilence, and it's God's way of punishing us for our sins. So I said, which of your sins in particular, Bill, is God punishing us for? And that made him angry. Of course, it was hard to tell that he had gotten angry. By the way, this is my book, An Actor Bows, Showbiz, God, and the Meaning of Life. And Chris Check, Dale Ahlquist, and Joseph Pierce all wrote endorsements, liner notes for this book. And of the 3 of them, I think one of them actually read it. But it's a great book and tells the story of my conversion from atheist to Catholic, and a lot of funny stories about my life in show business. And it's all true, and you can get that at grunky.com. Having said all of that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I normally do. Now, I might have to re-screen share to make sure I get the right thing. This is how I make my money. My wife and I run two theater companies. One is Upstage Productions, where we do interactive comedy, murder mystery, dinner theater shows, which I write and star in, which we've been doing for 30 years. That's how we make our money. And then we run Theater of the Word Incorporated, where we evangelize through drama with a cast of actors. That's how we lose our money. So it comes in one way and it goes out the other. That's me as Dr. Watson. Here's our actors with Betty White. We have a little promo videos. We do shows like The Beverly Killbillies. We do Chopped in Pieces. We do Cleaver It to Beaver. We do Death at Duck Dynasty. Doctor Whodunit, Field of Screams, Gilligan's Island of Death. That's me as Gilligan, by the way. So anyway, it goes on and on and on, the Hamilton homicide, Gone with the Passing of the Wind. But of course, that's politically incorrect these days, so we can't talk about that. But, so what happened when the lockdown began? You cannot perform live shows indoors with 100 people or more, packed together, shoulder to shoulder, laughing with me, typically not on a sound system, projecting and spewing forth whatever I've got in my lungs. That's not safe during a pandemic. And as Broadway has been shut down for who knows how long, so Upstage Productions, as of the middle of March, boom, that's it. We do about 200 live shows a year, believe it or not. And I perform most of those. And every weekend I'm somewhere else performing traveling all over the country. Usually when I do the Prairie Troubadour conference, I come down from a winery in Kansas that we perform at and do a quick show at the Prairie Troubadour and then head back up. But of course, we've had no shows. We've had no shows for 3 months now. So this is the first time I've gone 3 months without performing on stage in 30 years, believe it or not. And so I'm going stir crazy, and I'm driving my poor wife crazy, and I'm doing all these various characters around the house. But honestly, I panicked. Now, some of you will remember back to the early days of the lockdown. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what was going to happen. We still don't. But I mean, there are people, in our case, we don't really have an overhead. We only have to pay our actresses when we perform. We pay our travel expenses. So when we don't do shows, we don't really have any overhead. So that's a real blessing for us. But of course, there are people with restaurants. There are people with theaters. There are producers of major Broadway shows who had to pull the plug and who are losing millions and millions of dollars. So immediately, I fell back upon what I have been doing in addition to the live stage performances, which is teaching online for Homeschool Connections, which I love to do. I teach about 10 different courses a year for Homeschool Connections, and they let me teach whatever I want, and I absolutely love it. So I've done more of that, and I've started doing audiobooks full-time for St. Benedict Press, which is why currently I'm recording Joseph's collection of poems every Catholic should know. But in the first few days, or the first week or two, it was, I'd be okay one day, and then I'd crash the next. And then I'd be okay, and then I'd crash. And the big thing was, how the heck am I going to support myself and my family if we can't perform these shows that we've been doing for 30 years around the country? Now, I know Joseph and Dale, at least, I know them quite well, and I know they lost a lot of speeches as well. They lost a lot of in-person appearances, and they both, each of them lost tens of thousands of dollars, as did I. Well, for a while, I really didn't know, and I had a high level of anxiety, and then I remembered. And I think it was because I read it almost by chance, so to speak. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added unto you. I think that's our Lord's way of saying, be true to your vocation. My vocation is bringing words to life as a teacher, as a writer, as an actor. And in doing that, I am true to what God made me to do. And when I have a really good class online and things go really well, when the class ends, I'm really riding it high. I'm really excited because I know that I'm right where God wants me to be. And so, as T.S. Eliot says, take no thought of harvest, only of proper sowing, which is really saying the same thing. So my first big insight during the lockdown was, I've just got to do what God has made me to do and not worry about the rest. Allie Kavanaugh, who's a Catholic artist whom I met because I interviewed her for the St. Austin Review, the magazine that Joseph publishes, she says, God is my manager. She does her artwork and she lets God find the people who most need to purchase it and see it. And I think that takes a lot of faith, but I really think that's what we're called to do. Now, that's just sharing a little bit of what I was going through spiritually and emotionally. But of course, we all were going through something. And that is the shutting down of public masses all across the United States. This is a church in rural Kansas. I've done quite a few shows in rural Kansas. When you're on the high plains, you have these beautiful churches built by the Volga Germans. Germans who had emigrated to Russia and then came to the United States and built in the middle of nowhere on the high plains these incredibly beautiful churches. So here you even see Fear Street in German. And this is one of the many you drive. As you see, it's all gravel roads. You get off of Highway 70 on the high plains and you might drive for 30, 45 minutes, an hour on nothing but gravel roads, and you'll come to a little town like this with just a few houses and these incredible churches. This is a church that was completely shut down. It apparently isn't used and hasn't been used, and yet the door is unlocked because it's in a little town in the middle of nowhere. And in this church, in the basement, apparently they used to have bowling. Well, the bowling pins are pretty filthy and just sort of lying around. You've also got, unfortunately, a Christ from a crucifix who's just been placed on a little cot next to a bowling ball. And then you have this. I don't know if you can tell, but that's a little June bug or ladybug in a dried up holy water font as you come in the church, which of course is dried up because the church hasn't been used. Well, it hasn't been used, and we were without the Mass. Now, the reason I'm talking about the one essential thing is I want to quote this passage from Brideshead Revisited, because I think maybe it will give us a little share, a little insight into what really is necessary. Of course, we know that Jesus says to Martha that Mary has chosen the one thing needful. She is worshiping him while Martha is busying herself. But what is the one thing necessary when it comes to our faith? This is toward the end of Brideshead Revisited. I'll do the voices of the different characters. The narrator who's doing most of the talking is Charles Ryder, who's, I would say, sort of an agnostic, sort of a Protestant, kind of an Anglican agnostic Protestant. And he is dealing with this Catholic family, including Cara, who is the Italian mistress of the man who's dying, Lord Marchmain. And they're trying to figure out if they could convince Lord Marchmain to confess to a priest before he dies. And Charles Ryder can't figure out why this is important. And he says, "I wish someone would explain it to me," I said. "Quite what the significance of these sacraments is. Do you mean that if he dies alone, he goes to hell? And that if a priest puts oil on him—" "Oh, it's not the oil," said Cordelia. "That's to heal him." Odder still. "Well, whatever it is that the priest does, that he then goes to heaven. Is that what you believe?" And here's Cara, the Italian, the cradle Catholic, who, as you can see, doesn't really know her faith, as many cradle Catholics. Cara then interposed. "I think my nurse told me, someone did anyway, that if the priest got there before the body was cold, it was all right. That's so, isn't it?" The others turned on her. "No, Cara, it's not." "Of course not." "You've got it all wrong, Cara." "Well, I remember when Alphonse de Grenay died, Madame de Grenay had a priest hidden outside the door. He couldn't bear the sight of a priest, and they brought him in before the body was cold. She told me herself, and they had a full requiem for him, and I went to it." "Having a requiem doesn't mean you go to heaven necessarily." "Madame de Grenay thought it did." "Well, she was wrong." "Do any of you Catholics know what good you think this priest can do?" I asked. "Do you simply want to arrange it so that your father can have a Christian burial? Do you want to keep him out of hell?" "I only want to be told." Brideshead told me at some length, and when he had finished, Cara slightly marred the unity of the Catholic front by saying in simple wonder, after the actual Catholic doctrine has been explicated, Cara says, "I never heard that before." "Let's get this clear," I said. "He has to make an act of will," speaking of the dying man. "He has to be contrite and wish to be reconciled. Is that right? But only God knows whether he has really made an act of will. The priest can't tell, and if there isn't a priest there, and he makes the act of will alone, that's as good as if there were a priest. And it's quite possible that the will may still be working when a man is too weak to make any outward sign of it. Is that right? He may be lying as though for dead and willing all the time and being reconciled, and God understands that. Is that right?" "More or less," said Brideshead. "Well, for heaven's sake," I said, "what is the priest for?" There was a pause in which Julia sighed and Brideshead drew breath, as though to start further subdividing the propositions. In the silence, Cara said, "All I know is that I shall take very good care to have a priest." "Bless you," said Cordelia. I believe that's the best answer. And we let the argument drop, each for different reasons, thinking it had been inconclusive. Now, that's a fascinating part of that book, because in fact, theologically speaking, Charles Ryder is right, as the Catholic Brideshead admits. If, in fact, if you can't get to confession during the lockdown and you commit a mortal sin, if you are perfectly contrite, if you are sorry because you have offended God with your sin, and you pray to him that you are sorry, you will be forgiven. Now, you need to go to confession and have sacramental absolution before you receive the Eucharist again. That's part of the Catholic program, so to speak. But you can be forgiven with a direct prayer to God under the right conditions. Well, then we can ask, as Charles Ryder, what's the priest for? Now, one of the things that astonished me during the lockdown was how adamant devout Catholics became about the fact that they were without the Eucharist. Now, I understand that. The Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. And yet, for instance, St. Charles Borromeo shut down the churches in Milan for 2 years during an epidemic back in his day. 2 years where Catholics could not receive and attend a public mass. So this is nothing new. But God, you see, isn't conscribed by his sacraments. The sacraments are a gift to us. They're a way, as Kara says, you want a priest present when you're dying, even though technically speaking, you can directly commune with God. We can make spiritual communions as Catholics without receiving the precious body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ in the appearance of bread and wine. We can make a spiritual communion, and we have forgotten that perhaps, and perhaps we've forgotten why the churches were closed to begin with in our thirst and hunger for the Eucharist. But I think we need to recall that the core of our faith is not necessarily the sacraments, as wonderful as they are, but this self-sacrifice for the good of another. That's what we're about. And that's why we have one of these in every church in our land, to remind us that it's love, self-sacrifice, which is the foundation. And therefore, if we have to be, for the good of others, deprived of the sacraments for a certain amount of time, we should approach that in a spirit of self-sacrifice, as difficult as that is to do. But if a priest isn't necessary, if the sacraments aren't necessary, if they are God's way of communicating graces in a tangible way to give us an assurance of his presence, which is what they are, then what is the one thing essential, the one thing necessary? I'm quoting Chesterton here. Men spoke much in my boyhood about restricted or ruined men of genius, and it was common to say that many a man was a great might have been. You probably still know that kind of a phrase. Oh, he might have become something. Oh boy, that Dale Ahlquist, if only he had stayed in business, in the business world, and not started a literary society. What might he have been? Well, we say that many a man was a great might have been. To me, it's a more solid and startling fact that any man in the street is a great might not have been. At the back of our brains, so to speak, there was a forgotten blaze or burst of astonishment at our own existence. The object of the artistic and spiritual life was to dig for this submerged sunrise of wonder, so that a man sitting in a chair might suddenly understand that he was actually alive and be happy. None of this is essential, my friends. This is all a gift. We do not have a claim on our existence. It is all grace and our response to it. The grace is our existence, and the graces God gives us either through the sacraments or outside of the sacraments if we don't have access. And our response to that grace is to cooperate with it and to be grateful, because thanks is the highest form of thought, as Chesterton says, and thanksgiving is the highest form of giving. And I will wrap this up by saying, oh, I do have something I do want to share, because I put some numbers in here. We originally did this to protect the healthcare system from being overwhelmed, as it was in Italy, where they had to start doing triage and denying certain people treatment. In New York City, they almost were overloaded and they almost ran out of ventilators. In Santiago, Chile, where our friend Virginia de la Lastra, who's a Chestertonian, is the head of infectious diseases at a hospital in Santiago, they are very close to running out of ventilators, because Chile is now seeing the upsurge that we avoided by flattening the curve through social distancing. That's why we did it, to help the most vulnerable among us and our first responders. But keep this in mind. Tuberculosis in New York City in the year 1800, the mortality rate was 20,000 out of every 100,000 people. In other words, in 1800, 20% of the general population of New York City died of tuberculosis. That's not 20% of the people who caught it. That's 20% of everyone. 20,000 out of every 100,000 people. The Spanish flu in 1918, the mortality rate worldwide was 807 out of every 100,000. COVID in New York State in 2020 has been 158 out of 100,000. That's the state that's been hardest hit. In my state, Missouri, in 2020, 14 out of 100,000. I talked about St. Charles Borromeo, Italy, New York City, and Chile. So thank God this is not the crisis we had thought it would be. But of course, we have that other crisis going on right now. The other troubadours in their speeches over the past month or two, they only had to talk about the lockdown. I get to talk about the riots and the protests. So I have an advantage. Now, friends, we know that racism is a horrible thing, and we know that police brutality is a horrible thing. We also know that if defund the police means we don't want police, we want anarchy, that's insane. As Chesterton shows us in The Man Who Was Thursday, anarchy is not only crazy, it's impossible. There is no such thing as anarchy. There will always be an innate order, whether it's the strong man over the weak man or whatever built-in hierarchy comes out in a given situation. So what will happen in both cases is this. On the one hand, we have what may be a continuing lockdown if the cases spike. If that happens, and God forbid we see a lot of people sick and dying, I know 6 people who have had the coronavirus, believe it or not, who've had COVID. One of them continues to be asymptomatic. He's a senior citizen in an old folks home, or whatever you call those these days. The other was a priest who, I'm sorry to say, passed away. My actor, Dave Treadway, an actor for Upstage Productions and Theater of the Word, had it, and had it pretty badly, but was not hospitalized. Our friend in Springfield, Illinois had it and was hospitalized for 4 nights. I have a student in New York City who had it, and there's one other person I know who had it. I can't think of off the top of my head, but I know 6 people. Oh, I know the fella from EWTN, Dan. What's his name? The guy from EWTN. He was on a life support. He's no longer at EWTN. He was with Dan Burke. Yes, Dan Burke was on a ventilator, and everybody was praying for him, and he miraculously, we think, got off. So that's 6 people, some of whom were very, very sick. So we can't take this lightly. But if it really is a low mortality rate, well, then we can go back to church. We can go back to the sacraments. We can go back to, we hope, life is normal. But if it spikes again, then we're dealing with reality. Reality will correct us because God is reality. He has made reality. He is the source of reality. He is the realissimum, the most real. And for those people who really think that we can live without police, well, if they want to try it, reality will teach them a lesson as well. I think, and generally speaking, most people are saying, let's reform the police. But if people really are pushing for an abolition of the police force, well, that's unreal. It's unreal to think that COVID is greater or less than it is. And it's unreal sometimes when we're at Mass and we don't really hear about or get to commune with God himself, when we're told things that aren't quite Catholic, or when the music isn't good, or when the art is bad. That's another form of unreality. If we're in touch with reality, with the great creation and the truth that's all around us, with the truth, beauty, and goodness that art, religion, poetry will lead us to, if we're in touch with these things, then reality will not have to teach us a lesson, and we will be living our lives in accordance with the truth, which is really what this is all about, because the great truth is love, and we are called to be loving people. And that's my talk.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. As MC, I get to ask the first question, but there was something I was supposed to have announced that wasn't in the script. That was the problem. But Dale Ahlquist, of course, is a man of mystery. He's also the man who solves mysteries. So apparently Dale Ahlquist knows what's happening next month with the next Troubadours meeting. None of the rest of us have the foggiest idea, but Dale assures us that at 9 o'clock at the witching hour, 9 o'clock Eastern, that is, whatever time it is locally, he will reveal all. So please don't go anywhere until Dale reveals all. Heaven forbid. Now, as I am the MC, I get the chance to ask the first question, and I was conflicted about what two questions I wanted to ask our guest speaker. The first one related to the T.S. Eliot quote. When T.S. Eliot said we don't have to worry about Harvard, we only have to worry about sewing. I'm wondering what T.S. Eliot was saying about needlework versus the actual Ivy League schools. But I think we'll leave that one to maybe when we.
No, he said harvest. Take no thought of harvest.
Oh, it's Harvard.
But
Take no
only
thought of
of proper sewing. Yes,
worry about sewing.
No, not Harvard.
I misunderstood. Answered.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But the other question is connected to St. Charles Borromeo. At the height of the pestilence there, at the height of the plague, he didn't run away as the bishop of his flock. He actually rallied with the battle joy that our friend Christopher Check is always keen to talk about. He rallied the clergy, and he was in the front line, and he went to the actual plague houses. He put his hands on the sick, and he was part of that. So they, whether or not they could go to mass, they were certainly a priest there for the last rites of the church. And the one thing is, yes, if it's impossible for us to get to the sacraments, including, of course, the last rites, in extremis, in that situation, we can make a perfect act of contrition, and God will know that we couldn't possibly get a priest. We couldn't possibly go to confession. But if we could go to confession, if we could get a priest, then we're in big trouble. If we think, I don't need to bother about that, I'm feeling sick. If you're about to die, you probably are. I'm too tired. I'm not going to bother. No, at that point, you're in trouble. And the quote you mentioned from Chesterton about the might have been as opposed to the might not have been, I think the big problem is, as regards the abyss, the chasm that separates heaven from hell, is not what the might have been or the might not have been, but the might not be. In other words, that we can actually refuse the gift of essence, the essential, by being in the presence of God forever in heaven, as opposed to refusing that because we can't be bothered with the sacraments. Now, I know you're not suggesting that, but I would like clarification, because the suggestion was, well, as long as we've got the crucifix and we love Jesus, we don't need priests. Well, that is not the teaching of the church, and I want you to clarify.
No, of course not. Yeah, thank you, Joseph. I think that's very well said. But the interesting thing in that scene from Brideshead Revisited is they can't really come up with an effective answer to the Protestant objection, except we as Catholics know what that answer is. We have a sacramental faith. We have a faith that's incarnate in the way that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. So God's grace is communicated through actual material things, through words, through contact, through human contact, and so forth. We understand that that's how we normally have access to grace. But as I said, God can work around that. God does that for our sake, not for his. It's not as if God says, I cannot forgive the people who wish to be forgiven unless they go to confession. He's able to, because he's God. He can do anything. But of course, you're right. Under normal circumstances, if we can avail ourselves of the sacraments, we have not only an obligation to, but it's part of the gift. It's not essential in the sense that if we have to be deprived of it, will we suffer? Well, God can work around them. But it's not essential in the sense that nothing's essential. Everything's a gift. And so God gives us the sacraments as an additional way to communicate his love for us and our means of approaching sanctification. So, but in that work of fiction and Brideshead Revisited, I think it's very well set, because Protestants or Catholics or agnostics who read that aren't going to quite know where to come down. But I think Evelyn Waugh is brilliant in that in the midst of it, he's being funny, because really the one person who's completely clueless is Cara, who not only doesn't really know her faith as a cradle Catholic, but who's been living as a mistress of the man who's dying for many years. So, you have that. So in some ways, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So I agree with what you said, and I didn't mean to put a Protestant spin on things, but I did want to remind people.
No, I know you didn't mean to do that. I'm not suggesting that you did, and I'm going to resist the temptation to continue the conversation with you, because there's some things I could you've raised there, because we have 4 other troubadours, and I would like to give Christopher Check the opportunity to go for the jugular.
Heavens. I'm going to have to look into this Charles Borromeo story, because I hear him quoted by and cited by people on really both sides of the lockdown argument. And as Joseph was saying, and then the closing of the churches. And so I need to really find out where the fullness of the story. It wasn't so long ago. We should be able to know. But it is funny how he has been cited by both sides. I invited the staff of Catholic Answers, or the staff of Catholic Answers came back to the building in force today for the first time in what amounts to now 3 months, almost exactly. And one of the things that I explained to my staff, and God bless them, and thank you to my IT department, and they all worked extremely hard. And the productivity of Catholic Answers, except for the sort of things that Kevin was describing, continued, in fact, probably increased. But you're right, Tim Staples wasn't going on the road to give a talk, and I was not, and we couldn't hold our conference, which has had to be canceled for this September. But everything else that we do as a media apostolate continued and increased. And I think my staff was very excited about that we were able to keep up with that pace and that energy, in spite of the fact that all of us, most of us, we kept the radio studio open, we're working from home. But one of the things that I explained to my staff in a letter that I wrote them 2 Mondays ago was, and I mentioned King Lear, talking about the reality of eyesight in the play. And in the very beginning of the play, Kent is banished, and what word does Lear use, or phrase, or order? He says, "out of my sight." And then, of course, Kent responds, "See better, Lear, let me still remain the true blank of thine eyes." And then later in the play, of course, Gloucester, for his misdeeds, but also for his loyalty to the king, has his eyes gouged out, and he's not able to be reconciled with his son Edgar when he runs into them on the heath, because he doesn't see him there. And so I was explaining to my staff in a long way around and being very pedantic about it, but nonetheless, that we very much depend on things that we can see and feel. And at the heart of this, and at the heart of the sacraments, and at the heart of community, is propinquity, that is nearness, our nearness to one another. And so I'd like to hear from the actor, especially because there's a great bit of difference between being able to pursue your trade, Kevin, over the screen, but it is not by any means much the same way a mass is not the same thing. It's a video image of a mass, but it's not the mass. And I think that your particular profession, your skill, your talent, your art, there really underscores this sacramental nature of community. And okay, I take your point. Essential, yes, all of this is a gift, but I think propinquity is essential to human relationships. It's why the sacraments are in fact rooted in being near. They don't work from far away. Anyway, I've gone on too long.
Well, yes, all art is incarnational, drama in particular, because we call our traveling theater troupe the Theater of the Word Incorporated, because it's a play on word incorporated, word become flesh. As the word became flesh and dwelt among us, so we as actors flesh out on stage the words that are on a printed page. And that presence of a performance in front of you as an audience makes a huge difference. I think those of you who have been, especially to live shows, it can happen in movies too, but especially in a live performance, there's a kind of a church thing that happens when you've got people on stage who are true to the art that they are incarnating, and they can then connect you. They form a kind of priestly function themselves and can connect you, the audience, to that which is beyond, and to the great truths that the work of art is communicating. When that happens, you can have in a theater this sense of communion, even though it's not sacramental communion that we take with the body and blood of Christ, but it is a kind of communion. It's analogous to that. It's everybody drawing together because of the experience that's happening in a kind of ritual that is played out right before people's eyes. So of course, that's important. And, you know, everybody's being homeschooled these days, and you have people saying, oh, homeschooling's not working. Well, homeschooling certainly can work, and online education can work, but we do know that preferably if there were a technology that would enable all of us tonight to be physically together in one room without worrying about social distancing or the virus, and without the expense involved in travel, that would be much more profound. Because when we're all together on stage, as we sometimes are with our panel discussions at the end of the Prairie Troubadour conferences, that's a lot more fun, because the audience is shooting us questions and we're answering, and some of us are being silly and some of us are being serious, and it's all happening there at one place at the same time. So yes, of course, you're right, Chris. My goal with my speech was just to sort of do a little corrective. The thing that I left out of my speech, because I didn't want it to go too long, was Hamlet finally at the end of Hamlet recognizes he's going to die. Now he has in Act 5, as Joseph Pierce will point out, he's given himself over to divine providence, that there is a providence in the fall of a sparrow. But when he knows that he's been poisoned with the sword, that's when he then kills the king. There is an immediacy and a reality, especially to death, but certainly to things that are in propinquity to us, that are right there in front of us. And when you're facing death, you do, as Kara said in Brideshead Revisited, you get yourself a priest. Even if he might not be quote unquote essential, you get yourself a priest, because we need what is right before us. That's how we live. We are creatures with bodies, and we live in a world that's material and spiritual at the same time.
Thank you, Kevin. We're getting short of time here. I don't want to keep people much beyond the 9 p.m. Eastern witching hour. So, William Fahey, you have yet to put Kevin O'Brien on the spot.
Would you like me to?
I would love you to, William.
Kevin, thank you for your talk. I disagree with the heart of it, I'm afraid, as much as I love you. You know, as a historian, or as Joseph would say, an historian, I take comfort that even in a democratic age, I think the exception and the exceptional man will be what we study. And so perhaps future histories of the Catholic Church will look at this age and they'll find 2 or 3 marvelous people, and they'll dedicate the chapter on those people. But as far as the church goes, I don't see this as an age of of prudence, certainly not creativity or courage. It looks like an age of retreat, of priests and bishops forfeiting a lifetime opportunity to give witness to the faith, of princes of the church being given an opportunity to regain the ground that they lost over the last 30 years, and instead, not all of them, but too many of them, sprinting away from Christ. What you've described is the individual's approach to his faith, not the public side of the church. So, I mean, Charles Borromeo, let's just start with Borromeo. Borromeo closed the doors of the church, but he remembered that justice requires that God is publicly worshiped. And so although the people weren't able to receive the sacrament, and I agree with you, it's almost obsessive, the degree to which people are concerned with their personal need for the sacrament. Everyone seems to have forgotten Borromeo never, like the majority of bishops across the globe, never ceased the public worship of God. He had the Mass celebrated in squares. He forbade people to come in those squares. He told them to open up their windows so that they could witness the public worship of God. I've never worried about me individually any more than I always worry about me individually. I'm a Benedictine oblate. I kind of like just being able to pray the Liturgy of the Hours more. I didn't fret over my need for the Eucharist, but I did fret considerably over my church and the bishops of the United States and the terrible example that the majority, not all, but the majority have given by showing no creativity. And apart from a kind of consistent creativity in asking the laity to remember their parish contributions, that has been a great sign of unity amongst the bishops of the globe, has been the request to remember to support the church. But creativity, when countless laity have made suggestions, when countless Catholic historians have said, turn to the pages of history, I'm unconvinced that the future will be able to look upon this chapter as anything other than a dark age for the church.
Thank you, Bill. That was
My job is
said.
always to be an Eeyore and be hard. So
Let me,
Kevin, you understand acting. I'm
Oh,
just
yeah,
playing
that's
my
great.
part.
No,
Okay.
that's great. That was very well said.
And before, since we're running out of time, Kevin, I'll just pile it on so you can answer both of us at the same time here. Here's what I worried about when I gave my first talk for the Troubadours when we opened up our series, which was, I'm afraid that apathy will set in and that people will get used to not going to church. And now the Mass is opened up here in the Twin Cities, but you have to sign up to go so they know how many people, so they know how many people are going to be in the church, because they have a limit to how many people can be in the church. And many churches are reporting that they're not getting this, and this is to get to 50% capacity, 250 max. Many churches are reporting they're not even reaching the minimum. Less people are signing up to go to Mass under these new conditions. So the people they're the people that wanted the sacraments, but as I feared, people are finding it easier to stay home, and the numbers are already starting to prove it.
Let me just, before Kevin answers, let me say one thing. We'll come back to Dale for the secret announcement as soon as Kevin finishes his response. Alas and alack, I don't think we're going to have time for questions this time, so I apologize for those of you that asked them. Hopefully next time we will have more time for that. But Kevin, if you want to bring the curtain down, except for the secret announcement, of course, which is the encore.
Sure. I do want to, somebody said in chat, they pointed out that 2/3 of the Fatima children, the visionaries who saw the apparitions, succumbed to the 1918 Spanish flu. So Sister Lucy survived. The other two fell victim to the flu. So I wanted to point that out, that that at least is a tie-in. I love this. This is so much fun. I love participating in it, even when I'm an audience member. And I really look forward to being back at the Prairie Troubadour in Kansas when the conferences start up again. You guys were great. You had great questions and comments. Dan, I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to throw anything in, but I'm going to let Dale wrap it up with the special surprise mystery announcement. And I think you're all going to get an email. There will be links to everything that we want you to check out, including my website, which is grunky.com, Grunky. That's a word that G.K. Chesterton came up with to describe his spirituality when he was 5 years old. I've got a lot of fun stuff on my website. Okay, Dale, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And before Dale does wrap things up with the encore, with the mystery announcement, I would like to point out here, because one or two people have mentioned that Dan Kerr, who's is apparently popular, which perplexes me, that Dan Kerr hadn't had a chance to actually ask a question. What I would actually point out is that Dan did message the other troubadours to say, feel free to leave me out. And as we were running behind schedule, I took his act of great sacrifice with gratitude. And so that's why he wasn't called to speak, not because we don't love him, but because he volunteered to be left out because of the shortage of time. And we are now almost at the witching hour. So on that, I want to, first of all, before we do pass things again to Dale, please, great round of applause for our guest troubadour, Kevin O'Brien.
Here.
Dale, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Joseph, for your wonderful job of emceeing tonight. Thank you, Dan Kerr, for your generosity in being included out in the questions. And thanks most of all to Kevin for his great talk and your participation tonight. Absolutely provocative and lovely, and gave us all good fodder. Everyone who's watching tonight and everybody on the list will be getting a mail tomorrow with announcements from all of the troubadours about upcoming events, and please pay attention to all those. But next month, the troubadours will be back on the third Tuesday of the month, because we are the Tuesdays with the troubadours. The third Tuesday, which will not be on a Thursday next month. It'll be on a Tuesday, the third Tuesday, which is...
Hey, Dale, the bishops can move Thursdays to Sundays. So we want to move a Thursday.
And we will take that under advisement. July 21st. July 21st is our next Tuesdays with the Troubadours. We talked tonight about, we are a literary group, as we know, but we also talked about how everybody has been spending time in front of the screens these days. Well, the troubadours are going to go to the movies. Next month, each of the troubadours will be giving a film review recommendation / appreciation of an important movie in their life that they want to talk about to everyone. So we're going to hear from all 5 of the troubadours about an important movie in their life. Here is film, the most vivid of all art films ever, of all art forms ever created. Certainly the most successful, and also the most disappointing and unsatisfying. Why is that? We're going to hit that next month. Please join us. Thank you all. Good night and God bless.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, everybody. God bless.
Thanks.
Ciao.